Good morning, everyone. I think we'll make a start. We have around 30 participants, which is great, and so we'll start. So thank you. Good morning, and thank you very much for joining our fish ClientEarth, Sciaena, CZ Risk, and Charitable Trust, and Oceana. Sorry, there was one more. For this briefing ahead of the December 15th and 16th AGRIFISH Council meeting, where EU countries are expected to set fishing limits for 2021 for approximately 30 stocks, which are managed exclusively by the EU. As these stocks are exclusively fished by EU member states, the EU has no one else to blame if it sets quotas above the limits advised by scientists. These make up around 25% of the Northeast Atlantic stocks that the EU usually fishes, has access to, with the rest being shared with the UK and Norway. In the past, negotiations over the shared stocks have repeatedly led to overfishing, and then what we had was finger pointing for each party blaming each other. Well, it's really important to remember that the common fisheries policy has a very clear 2020 deadline set all the fishing limits not exceeding scientific advice. This AGRIFISH Council provides an opportunity for the EU to set an example to the upcoming negotiations with Norway and UK as well, by delivering on its legal obligations and global ocean leadership and the Green Deal aspirations by setting these quotas in line with scientific limits. Again, thank you very much for joining. What will happen now, as you can see on your screens, is that we'll have 5 brief presentations by NGO colleagues, and after we'll open the floor for questions. In the meantime, you can ask your questions to the Q&A so that our speakers have an opportunity to start thinking on how they will answer. And with no further delay, I would give the floor to Rebecca Hubbard from Overfish.
Thanks, Gonzalo. And in case you couldn't hear Gonzalo really well, you can start asking questions in the chat during the presentations, but each of these presentations will be short, so it's a bit of a speed briefing so that we can get to questions and answers. So I will just speak very briefly about how the setting of EU fishing limits at this AGRIFISH Council tomorrow is a test on the EU's commitment to addressing the biodiversity and climate crisis. As a very brief context setter, we like to refer to the ocean as a life giver and fish as the lifeblood, because without the ocean, we couldn't have life on the planet. In fact, of course, we should be called planet ocean, not planet Earth. It provides around half of the oxygen. It stores around 30% of the carbon. It regulates the climate. Without it, the planet would be 36 degrees hotter from climate change because of the heat absorption. And of course, that's not even touching on the incredible importance of the ocean in terms of providing food, medicine, well-being for people, not just on the coast, not just in the fishing industry, but everywhere across the planet. As I'm sure we're all critically aware of, and 2020 has shown more than ever, with the COVID crisis, the health of the planet is absolutely critical to the health of people. And when we impact on the health of the planet, we impact on the health of people. And although this year has been super intense with COVID and the crisis that COVID has brought in many different ways, this is dwarfed by the scale of the crisis of climate change and the loss of biodiversity across the planet. I think it was last week, or just recently, Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, talked about the fact in his in his State of the Planet speech, talked about the fact that humans are waging war on nature. Oceans are overfished. This is one example of that, and that we need to change our relationship with nature in terms of the impact that we're having on the ocean and the importance and the impact of fishing. Fishing has the biggest impact on ocean biodiversity, because what we're talking about here is not just individual species. We're talking about impacting the whole food web, the whole ecosystem, and with it, the ocean's capacity to provide us with those essential services. The European Environment Agency's Marine Messages 2 report recently demonstrated how bad the state of EU seas are and the role of destructive and overfishing that contributes to that. Of course, obviously that then has impacts on the fisheries and social impacts, not just within the fishing industry, but within those coastal communities and then more broadly. And of course, this is demonstrating that we really are missing out on an opportunity as well. We're not just actually having an impact, we're actually preventing ourselves from achieving and benefiting from even greater goods from the ocean. Because according to analysis from the New Economics Foundation, we could have 1.6 billion euros more annually, 20,000 jobs, and of course food for 89 million citizens. So what does this AGRIFISH Council mean? What's it going to be testing? Well, the EU has just recently made a whole raft of big commitments, not just besides the fact that it has these laws that Gonzalo referenced with the Common Fisheries Policy and a commitment to end overfishing, but the EU Green Deal, the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030, the ambition to be climate neutral by 2050, the recent Leaders Pledge for Nature, the recent high-level panel for the ocean, 100%, give it 100% action. All of these things are important, and it's important that the EU is ambitious and shows the world that it is going to, address this assault on nature, and we're going to do better with our resource management and protect our biodiversity. But it's all just words, and tomorrow and Wednesday, the EU Council will demonstrate whether or not it's actually going to walk the talk, because tax setting, the setting of fishing limits, is by far the most direct and simplest, most transparent way that we can see how committed EU ministers and EU leaders, such as the Commissioner Sinkevicius, are to addressing this assault on nature. So this is the big question, and of course, what they do will then influence very strongly what Norway and the UK do as well. So that's all I have to say. I just wanted to set the context and the broader landscape for the briefing. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Exactly on time. So I'll give the floor now to Andrea Ripoll from please go ahead.
Mute. Okay, yes, thank you, Gonzalo. So I'm gonna minimize this. So I'm Andrea Ripoll from Seas at Risk, and I'm going to very briefly explain how has been the progress so far for the EU in terms of ending overfishing, and for which stocks fisheries ministers are the most likely to exceed scientific advice in the upcoming meeting. Wait, that's better. Okay, I don't know if you can see all this. Okay, so in terms of progress to end overfishing, fortunately there is no magic figure that I can bring forward and explain to you how far did the EU and how many stocks and what is the percentage of tax that have been set in line with scientific advice that everyone agrees, because it depends on how you look at the data that you get different figures. And this is also something we criticize a lot from the Commission, because in the way they treat normally the data, they tend to come up with a figure that paints an overly rosy picture and sounds like we are almost done with the work we have to do to end overfishing in the EU. And unfortunately, we are far from there. According to our own analysis, NGOs, more in particular the Pew Charitable Trust, for the Northeast Atlantic last year, which was the year of the legal deadline in the CFP to end overfishing, 46% of the analyzed tags were set exceeding scientific advice. And this was even a step backwards compared to previous year when 41%, according to Pew, were set exceeding scientific advice. And this is when you take and you look at all the total allowable catches, but actually the story is much worse when you look at fish stocks that are data limited, because for this group of fish stocks, we should be paying more caution, be more precautionary, because we don't know enough of their status, and not only follow scientific advice, but even going below scientific advice, because we don't know how the management measures will play. But fisheries ministers tend to do the opposite, and because they say there is not enough information, they systematically tend to ignore scientific advice. So for these stocks, picture looks worse. From last year, around 70% of these type of stocks were set their fishing limits above scientific advice. Then for the deep sea, the last council, which was in 2018, the outcome was that several tags were removed, leaving these fish stocks without a management or a control system. And among the remaining tags, over half of them were set above scientific advice for 2019 and for 2020. For these stocks, they are like data poor stocks and data limited. So this is also one of the reasons why fisheries ministers tend to ignore scientific advice. Okay, so when looking at the figures that the scientific body that is consulted by the European Commission, the figure is TCF, the figure doesn't differ much from our own analysis. It's 38% of the stocks analyzed in the Northeast Atlantic that remained overfished in the latest report that they published this 2020. And the differences in the figures as well is because they look at fish stocks, not fishing limits as we do, and they also take the data that is coming out of the fishing activity. So there is a bit of a delay. That's why the graph says till 2018. But in general, we can see that from 2014, there has been a decrease and there has been progress, which was when the CFP reform entered into place. However, according to NGOs, but also by this scientific body, progress is too slow and many fish stocks remain overfished to date. Okay, so when looking at these stocks that are most at risk of not like ministers will most likely not follow scientific advice, as I said, all these group of stocks that are data limited, as a general rule, we can suspect that fisheries ministers won't be following the advice, and more in particular, we have for the Northeast Atlantic 3 tags for pollock in the Bay of Biscay and in Iberian waters, and 1 of sole in the west of Ireland. Here, the Commission took a step in the right direction, although in the proposal already exceed scientific advice, but probably ministers will go way over that. Then we have Kattegat cod, which has a 0 tag, and because it's considered a bycatch tag, so they want to prevent the choking of the landing obligation. And normally also fisheries ministers will go ahead, will go above the scientific advice of 0 tag. And then for the deep sea, usually they are decided 10 stocks, but tomorrow only 3 stocks will be decided, EU only. And roundnose grenadier in Skagerrak and Kattegat will be most likely also exceeded in terms of scientific advice, because the advice is 0, and the Commission has already proposed 5 tons. Although this is a step in the right direction again, because it's a 90% reduction. For us, the roundnose grenadier, not only, I mean, it's an endangered species classified as that under the IUCN Red List. So for us, it's questionable that the Commission is even asking for sustainable catches of an endangered species. And for us, this should be not the case, and in any case, a 0 tag. And this round counter all the ambitions that the Commission is putting forward under the European Green Deal and the biodiversity strategy. So, okay, I hope I was within my time. This is a quick summary.
Thank you very much, Andrea. That was quite succinct. Thank you. So I'll now give the floor to Jenny Grossman from ClientEarth. Please, Jenny.
Thanks, Gonzalo. I'm just going to share my screen and hope you can see this. Let me just put that into presentation mode. Here we go. Hopefully you can see that now. I would like to present to you on the risk that the way that fishing limits are currently set in the EU poses for the sustainability of EU fisheries as a whole because of illegal discard. So this is an additional risk factor on top of what you've just heard from Andrea. So first of all, I want to give you a very quick recap of the discard ban. So the discard ban, as most of you will be aware, was a major policy change that was brought in a couple of years ago. Before it came into force, fishers were essentially allowed to throw that part of their catch that they didn't want, for example, because they didn't have quota, overboard and land only that part of the catch that they wanted. Now with the discard ban, that has changed, at least on paper. So fishers are supposed to not discard, but land everything that they're catching. Of course, there's some exemptions to facilitate this, but for the sake of this presentation, let's just keep it simple. So what does that have to do with fishing limits or tax? Basically, the TAC should, in theory, be based on scientific advice, even though you've just heard from Andrea, that's not always the case. Scientific advice, usually on the most basic level, contains two figures. One bigger figure that refers to the total catch. So this is a figure that assumes that there's no more discarding beyond that level. So this is the maximum catch that can be taken without being unsustainable. Then there's also a smaller figure, so you'll see that in the top right corner, I've got an example, which refers to the landings or the wanted catch. So this figure is smaller because it factors in that there's a level of discarding still happening. So what does that mean for the setting of fishing limits? Well, before we had the discard ban, we had a system where the fishing limits were essentially based on the landings advice. So they went for the smaller figure, recognizing that in order to get to that level of landings, part of the catch would have already been thrown overboard. So in this case, the TAC would have been 50 tons in line with the advice. Now, with the discard ban, the system has shifted from regulating the landings to regulating the total catch. So now the TAC would be set based on that bigger figure, the total catch of 100 tons, which would, of course, in theory be fine if everybody was actually following the rules and landing everything that they're supposed to be landing. So you can probably see where this is going. The problem that I'm trying to highlight here is that in reality, we still have a certain level of illegal discarding happening, even though it is quite difficult to quantify. And in the end, this leads to a recipe for disaster, as I call it here, because we now have a system where the way that fishing limits are set assumes that everybody plays by the rules. So basically, instead of the 50 tons that fishers would have received before the discard ban, they would now, in this example, get 100 tons based on the catch advice. That then means they would land 100 tons because that's what they have the quota for. But in order to get to that value, if compliance with the discard ban is poor, that means that if the discard rate stays the same, up to the same amount might have already been discarded at that point. So in the end, the catch that results from all of this might be, in this most extreme worst case scenario where nobody follows the rules, might be up to twice as high as what the scientific advice and the fishing limit actually said. So as I said, this is an extreme example, but it illustrates the point that essentially all of this is like cheating on your diet and then wondering why you're not losing weight. So it is the same. You're not going to end overfishing if you continue to illegally discard, but assume that nobody is breaking the rules. So the take-home message that I would like to get across here in terms of what's going to happen tomorrow and the day after is to treat with caution what you might hear from decision makers, because decision makers in principle have a tendency to want to present a success story and to say, XYZ percent, 99%, or all of the EU stocks will be fished sustainably next year. And the reason why you need to treat that with caution is because, as I've just showed, compliance is key, but it's currently poor. And this is widely recognized, not just by decision makers themselves, but even by members of the industry. And the way that fishing limits are currently set basically turns a blind eye on that and doesn't factor that in. There's also a recent paper which has looked at the extent of this issue of setting fishing limits at higher levels because of this discard ban, and that found that fishing limits are now actually set on average 50% higher than they would have been if they were still set based on landings. So in the end, the conclusion is we obviously need to make big improvements to compliance. And in the meantime, while compliance cannot be guaranteed, we need to make sure that the way that fishing limits are set actually factors these illegal discards in, because otherwise we end up having sustainability just on paper and not on the water, and that is simply not enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jenny. I will give now the floor to Jean-Christophe van der Veld from the Pew Charitable Trusts. Jean-Christophe, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Can you see my screen well?
Not yet.
Okay. I hope that you can now. Not yet. Okay. Sorry, I'm going to try again then. Let me do this one more time.
It's coming up. Yeah, it's on now.
Okay, good. Thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Gonzalo. I just want to give you a brief update on what is happening on the side of the shared stocks between the EU, the UK and Norway. You know that there is a lot going on at the moment regarding a general trade deal, and part of that is about fish. So I'm going to be brief, but we wanted to give you that update as well. So where are we today? We thought we could tell you that there was a deal or no deal, but we know that there is no decision yet, and the negotiations are going on, maybe until the end of the year. So yeah, it's still very uncertain on that front. But what we know is that in both cases, deal or no deal, there will be talks on fishing limits for 2021 that will need to happen next year anyway. So from the 1st of January, there will be a lot of talk about fish, and that could be taking some time. So if there is a deal, a general deal, these talks will happen, within the framework that would have been agreed. And if there is a no deal by the end of this year, there will be some talks on fish that will be according to international law, so the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea and the UN Fish Stocks Agreement. So I think it's important to have that in mind, that deal or no deal, there will be talks on the TACs next year anyway. So as I said, these talks could take months, because we have the experience that even when it was only with Norway, so between the EU and Norway, some negotiations could be difficult to have an outcome. So here with 100 stocks, there is a possibility that it takes time as well. That's why the EU Commission's proposed, as you probably saw, of course, a rollover an approach to roll over the 2020 TSCs for the first quarter of 2021, in a way to avoid or to ensure continuity for the fishers. And there has been also a contingency plan on access until the end of 2021 proposed by the Commission. Of course, these are just proposals. The UK and Norway need to agree on this for it to become reality. But what is important to take into account here is that, although in a kind of institutional point of view, that's kind of a good idea that the Commission proposes that, there is a lot of caution to have here, because we think that there is a high risk that these long and potentially painful fish talks could lead to somewhat down of the commitments and on the even on the deadlines and the law basically. And there is examples of stocks that are doing very bad and that we need to take strong actions for. Example, sea cod, Celtic sea cod, also some deep sea stocks. So these stocks shouldn't be the excuse for overfishing their stocks. Secondly, there is a general approach to have that is to follow scientific advice, to be precautionary, and also to seek for a long-term approach to management. I think it's an opportunity for the parties to see the things a bit more long-term than usual. And some parties said that they would be kind of keen to do that. So we'll see if it happens. And then the third thing is the transparency. We think it is key. Parties should publish their positions before negotiations because they need to be accountable for the decisions they take. There are NGOs, there are citizens that need to scrutinize the proposals and the decisions. And what we see at the moment in terms of what the Commission does is not a good sign, because there's been a few non-papers published by the Commission, as you probably know, on what the Commission plans to do for these fish tools, and some of them are not yet published more than 48 hours after. And I remind you that Sinkevicius, the Commissioner, said in July that under his mandate, these papers would be given to citizens and NGOs, so be public at the same time as to member states. So here there was already some transparency issues, but yeah, so that was what I wanted to put up front for you. Thank you.
Excellent, Jean-Christophe. Thank you very much. Now to finish it off, I would pass the floor to Javier Lopez from Oceana. Javi, you can see your presentation. Thank you. Go ahead. We cannot hear your voice though.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, now we can. Go ahead, Javier.
Okay, great. So in my case, and to close this round of presentations on the upcoming Fisheries Council decision on the setting of fishing opportunities for next year, we would like to give you some feedback on the Mediterranean. Okay, so yeah, on the status of the fish stocks, let me remind you that according to the United Nations biannual report on the status of the fisheries, of the world fisheries, the Mediterranean has the highest percentage of stocks fish at unsustainable levels. So when you compare with the other main regions around the globe, the Mediterranean is the one in the worst situation. And by how far these stocks are being overfished? So according to the own data from the European Commission, on average, the Mediterranean fish resources are known to be exploited around 2.4 times above sustainable levels. And this situation is not only, well, it's totally contrary to any kind of international agreement, but also contrary to the common fisheries policy objectives. And also what is more worrying is that there is no clear trend of improvement in the state and exploitation in this area. Also, it should be added that the Mediterranean fisheries have been or have a long history of overcapacity, underreporting, and non-compliance with impunity from the authorities. So the Mediterranean can be considered like the black spot of the common fisheries policy. Related to the management, advance you that the fish stocks in the Mediterranean are subject to the European Union fisheries policies, obviously, but also are managed in the framework of the General Fisheries Commission for the Mediterranean, of which the European Union is member. This is a regional fisheries management organization dependent on the United Nations and is competent for the conservation of the living marine resources in this area. And one point to be highlighted in the context of the management is that while in the Atlantic, the most important fisheries are managed through catch limits, as my colleagues have previously speak about, in the Mediterranean, the fishing mortality is mainly restricted by the setting of fishing effort limitations. So these limitations impose restrictions on the fleet capacity, based mainly on gross tonnage, so the physical capacity of the vessels, and the engine power. No? And this is done mainly per days at sea, which is, as I said, the main tool to limit the fishing mortality. So what decisions will be adopted at the December AGRIFISH Council? So on one side, there will be the transposition to the European Union legislation of a group of over 10 recommendations adopted by GFCM, this regional marine organization, fisheries marine management organization. So in this case, there will be no room for the fisheries ministers to edit the content of this recommendation, and they will be directly transposed. Anyhow, it will have a serious impact in the management of these stocks. But the decision that will be key, and the one that is really in the hands of the fisheries minister, is the maximum allowable fishing effort limits for harvesting demersal stocks in the Western Mediterranean that they have to agree on. And this will be done in the context of the multi-annual plan adopted in 2019. So under the provisions of this plan, this multi-annual plan, each year the Council is to set a maximum allowable fishing effort for the fisheries exploiting certain group of stocks, and fishing opportunities for these stocks should be fixed to achieve, obviously, the sustainable fishing mortality that in this plan has to be achieved by 2020 where possible, and by 1st January 2025 at the latest. And to achieve this sustainable fishing mortality, the plan established that for the first year of the implementation of the plan, which was this current year, 2020, the maximum allowable fishing effort was or had to be reduced by 10%, something that was done. But for the years 2 to 5 of the multi-annual plan, the maximum reduction of the fishing effort is set at 30%, something that for us is unacceptable, taking into consideration the status of the fisheries in the area. Saying that the maximum reduction in 5 years, or put a limit in the maximum reduction of the fishing effort, doesn't really make sense. This is something that doesn't exist in the Atlantic, for example, either. So the decision, no? The latest scientific advice obviously confirms that most of the stocks are overfished and that fishing mortality must be reduced. As you can see, for most of the stocks, this reduction advised by the scientific body, by the STCF, are huge. I mean, are between 40 to 70, even 80% reduction in the fishing mortality. So yeah, this confirms which is the status of the fisheries in the area. So until taking in mind this scientific advice and the context of the, of the provisions included in the management plan, so the European Commission is limiting the reduction of the fishing mortality, the fishing effort, is proposing to be reduced during next year by 15%. Obviously, this is something that is not ambitious enough for us, but something that surprisingly, the 3 main countries affected by this regulation, Spain, France, and Italy, are totally against. They are claiming for a rollover, keeping the same fishing effort, or a very slight reduction of it. So obviously, we, NGOs, in light of the status of these stocks, and unfortunately we have to follow this multi-annual plan adopted last year, we are claiming for a stronger fishing effort reduction. And in our case, we are recommending the fishing effort to be reduced at least by 20%, if not more. We have to remind, obviously, that the more we reduce the fishing days today, the quicker the fish stocks will recover and support fisheries tomorrow. So obviously the final message that is mainly for the member state, for the fisheries ministers, is that they should really keep committed to the sustainable objectives and to the science if they don't really compromise further the future of the Mediterranean fisheries. And that's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Javier. So I would immediately just open the floor for questions. As I wrote you can raise your hand or just take the floor or write your question in the chat option. I don't see any hands raised. Don't be shy. Any clarification that you've felt was needed? Okay, there's this. Okay, so Angelo, I would invite you to take the floor and ask a question. Yes,
thanks.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Please do.
Good morning. Thank you for this briefing. Now, I just proposed to give a look to this FAO report that has just been published. Actually, it seems that the situation in the Mediterranean is slightly improving. It's nothing impressive, but it's slightly improving, and I wanted a comment from your side on this, if you can. Of course, maybe it's too early to say something.
Yeah, if I may react to that. Yes, this morning it has been presented, the latest report from FAO on the status of the Mediterranean fisheries. Unfortunately, it was done at 11, so I was not able to listen to it or participate. But yeah, there are some indicators suggesting that there is a slight recovery in the status of the fish stocks, but for us this is far away to be sufficient. I mean, the recovery trend is so slight and so minimum in comparison to the levels that the stocks should be recovered that we cannot praise this recovery. And on the contrary, what we should do, or what we are claiming, is to reinforce any kind of effort to reduce the fishing effort in the area that is really needed. And also in the context of the Mediterranean, is not only the need of setting proper fishing effort restrictions, is that, as I said in the presentation, there is a very long history of lack of compliance, and also if the fisheries are managed through fishing effort, when most of the fishing or many of the fishing fleet or the fishing vessels in the Med had or has or exceed the maximum allowable engine power, because as we know there is a limit, there is a cap in the engine power, and many vessels in the Mediterranean exceed this maximum cap, makes a lot of questions on if it is the best way of managing the fisheries in the Med. So we are not very optimistic, because as I said, the position of Italy, France and Spain is not willing to follow the proposal of the Commission that, as I said, is proposing to reduce only by 15% the fishing effort. And if you compare to the Atlantic, from one year to the other, there are many fisheries which are reduced. The catch limit is reduced significantly. For example, last year, North Sea cod was reduced by 50%. And no one was, I mean, the fishing industry has had an impact this year, but this kind of reductions, in order to find the sustainability in the long term of the resources, are from time to time implemented in the Atlantic, but we see that there is not the same demand for the management of the fisheries in the Mediterranean, unfortunately. So as I said, we are not very optimistic in the short term with the situation of the Mediterranean, and also because, as I said, in the case of the Western waters, the maximum allowable reduction in the fishing effort in the next five years will be 30%. And scientists are saying that the fishing mortality should be reduced in many cases by 50, 70, 80%. So now we know that in 5 years, we are going to miss again the objective of exploiting at sustainable level the resources in the Med. Sorry if I extend myself too much.
Thank you, Javier. I think that was very useful. We have two questions in the chat related to Brexit from Louise Guillot and from Julien Giraud. I think they are more or less the same. So if you don't mind, I would sum them up, which is basically the impact of Brexit tomorrow and in the future in terms of fish stocks. Perhaps Jean-Christophe, you can take the floor first to answer this one.
Yes, thanks, Gonzalo. I think that regarding the impacts on tomorrow's discussion, and tomorrow and Wednesday, I think that, yeah, I mean, at least the member states will need to look at the Commission's proposal about, you know, the 25% rollover that the Commission proposed to kind of smooth, you know, the transition early 2021 to avoid disruption. So that needs to be agreed by ministers. We don't know if there will be a lot of discussions around that, but at least the ministers need to agree on that, pending agreement also from the UK and Norway on this. But even if the UK and Norway don't agree on this approach of the 25%, so we can still apply in EU waters anyway. So I think that's going to be one of the discussion. And then about the health of stocks, that's the risks that I raised in my presentation. That's exactly the thing that we want to caution against, is to take decisions that are not precautionary enough, given the context of, you know, the risks that some parties go for unilateral tax, for example, you know, setting unilateral tax if there is no agreement. So there is a big risk there of overfishing. We have examples of that, for example, with Iceland and others in coastal states negotiations. But yeah, so I think that there is that risk of everyone going, you know, by his measure and by his own management at the detriment of the general fish stocks health.
Yeah, if I may add to the situation of the European Union and the UK fisheries agreement, the European Union failed the deadline, the 2020 deadline, to recover the stocks and exploit them at sustainable level. But we acknowledge that there was a recovery trend in the last decade. I mean, 10 years ago, the overfishing rate in the Atlantic was around 80, 75%. And nowadays, as Jenny or Andrea was informing, it is around, the official figure, I mean, it's around 38%. So there is a reduction in the overfishing rate. And that was thanks to the collaboration and the joint effort of all the parties, all the member states, which have shared objectives. Now, the situation of the UK leaving the European Union brings a huge risk to stop or even reverse this trend. So as far as both parties are unable to agree on common objectives and, for example, on sustainable catch limits for the Northeast Atlantic, what is going to happen is that very easily we can see how this positive trend is reversed. So the risk for the sustainable management is huge. And also, it's not only about the status of the European Union or the European stocks, it's as well on the socioeconomic performance of the European fleet, which has been making high record profits during last years, and all that can be watered down in a couple of years. So the risk is huge. And also, I don't know if I should answer the next question about the possibility of increasing the fishing pressure to Irish waters.
Maybe I think you can do it, Javier, and yeah, I think you can do it.
Okay, so obviously,
go ahead.
Obviously, hopefully there will be a kind of agreement between the European Union and the UK on the share, but it doesn't mean that the own proper allocation key for the stocks in the European Union is going to be changed or modified. I mean, member states that were not allowed to fish in Irish waters this year, previous year, are not going to be allowed to fish in Irish waters next year. For example, Denmark could be highly affected if European Union vessels are not allowed to fish in the North Sea, UK waters, but they will never be allowed to fish in Irish Sea if previously they didn't have quota to fish in this water. Obviously, if the UK restrict and prohibit the access of European Union vessels to its waters, it will have a strong and huge impact on the, as I said, socioeconomic performance of the European Union fleet. But the risk of increasing the fishing pressure or translating the fishing activity to other waters can exist mainly for stocks that are not managed through catch limits, So in this case, it can happen, but for stocks managed through catch limits, I don't see a huge impact as far as they set sustainable levels. Sorry.
Thank you, Javier. I don't know if any one of the other speakers wants to take these questions. They're about Brexit. Rebecca, I see your hand.
I just had one comment to make with regards to Brexit. I'm sure that the journalists also saw the statement from Norway at the end of last week. And I think that the point about coming to an agreement on EU and UK shared stocks is that actually it has ramifications beyond just the EU and the UK. Norway is very clearly saying, actually, we did a lot of work to, as Javier said, to manage these fish populations more sustainably. And that is at risk now. If you cannot make an agreement, then you are risking the sustainability, which risks our industry, and that's not acceptable. And we also have seen that the MSC has suspended certification of some fish stocks because there is a lack of agreement. So the failure of the UK and the EU to come to an agreement has actually quite broad-ranging impacts, both politically, both for consumers, for the health of the ocean. So it's really in the interest of the EU and the UK to come to an agreement, because it's going to have quite wide-ranging impacts if they don't. And it certainly won't look good on the global ocean governance stage, on the stage of international ocean governance. It is not going to be a good look for the EU and the UK to be setting their own fishing limits unilaterally. It's a completely unacceptable situation from the perspective of ocean governance. So we would hope that they will both work extremely hard to find a solution and agreement in the next few days, because otherwise it's going to look really bad.
Thank you, Rebecca. Andrea, I see your hand, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick comment that will deviate our attention a bit away from Brexit and put it back in the council that will happen between tomorrow and the day after. Just to say that as we know, only EU stocks will be decided at this council, stocks that are exclusively managed by the EU. And it's going to be for us like the fire test for the EU in terms of how committed are they with their own legal commitments and under the CFP, as they won't have to negotiate with third countries, which we all know is very complicated and it makes things more difficult. And they won't have this excuse, let's say, as they will be negotiating their own quotas with themselves. So for us, if the EU finally sets all fishing limits, as they should already have done last year, but if they do it for this small set of stocks this week, it's going to send the right signal and the right message to the negotiations that are coming up now. And okay, it's like most of the stocks that have to still be decided of, but for us, it's very important that they send this strong signal that they are committed with sustainability and that they are committed with scientific advice. And for us, this is also an important angle of the negotiation that is coming up.
Thank you very much, Andrea. I think that closes off really nicely. Yvonne, I saw your question. I think in a way, what we expect from Portuguese presidency is exactly what has been said. It is good to remember that among these 30 stocks, a lot of them are the most important ones for Portugal. So the key decisions for Portugal won't be so delayed. But indeed, it's all that has been said. And indeed, Portugal has been on its own very vocal about, in the international ocean governance stage, about reaching these aspirational goals. And indeed, the next 2 days, Portugal and the other member states will have a clear opportunity to really walk the walk and stop just talking the talk. I will close this session off. We're a bit over time already, but it's important to let everyone know that, of course, the speakers of this panel and their organizations will be available in these next few days to talk with you. You will receive an email with the recording of this session, but also some additional documentation. And of course, we will be available to talk to you in the next few days and in the next few months. as these negotiations with third parties continue. I hope this was useful. It definitely was good for us to have you all here. Big thank you to the speakers, and of course to the journalists and to the NGO colleagues who also followed this session. And I will also take the opportunity to wish you a very good season's greetings and a better 2021. Is that okay? Yep. Okay. So thank you. Until soon.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.